I'd like to thank everybody again for coming out here tonight, and everybody who's watching at home at another location. First off, I want to start out asking anybody here a sibling. We got pretty much everybody. Okay, I am too. I have an older sister and a twin sister, so I kind of had experiences in different areas. My older sister was 6 years older than me, so whenever she got mad at me, she just left, and I couldn't leave anywhere. But my twin sister, we were pretty much stuck to each other. We weren't actually, but people like to ask us if we ever were. But we weren't, but we found ways to deal with our differences, and that's kind of what we're going to talk about today, how to handle rivalry at home. As was said, I am a father. I do only have one child at this moment. He's a 14-month-old, but we do have two cats, and they do feel like kids sometimes, and they tend to hit and bite each other. So there's a little bit of some similarities there, but at least my wife thinks so. But all right, so sibling rivalry, that's the picture we always want to have, everybody loving and hugging on each other and always smiling and stuff, but that's not always what we get. So conflict. Conflict's always going to happen. It's a way of life. It's part of life. It's in our everyday lives, at work, at home, and everything like that. And with kids, with siblings, it's going to happen too. But it's important. It's important to learn it and have it at a young age. We don't always think about those kind of things. With our kids, when they're little, we want the best for them. We want them to always be happy and everything like that. But really, whenever they get stuck into a hard situation or a conflict, it's a good time for them to learn a good life skill. And so it's learning to argue is an important skill. It also builds better relationships later on. If you learn how to argue well, and by argue well, I don't mean someone who's trying to sell you something. I mean someone who knows how to be able to discuss a conversation or a topic and not let it get heated and out of hand. And if you're good at that and you learn how to do it, you're going to have better relationships with people later on in life. So the thing with conflicts are they're always going to be different. So developmental stages is always going to determine what that conflict's going to be like. And when we talk about developmental stages, what we mean is how old are the kids that are having this conflict. Obviously, the younger they are, they're going to be arguing over different things than, say, your teenage kids are going to be arguing over. So it's always going to be a little bit different, and you're probably going to use different tools in terms of how you're going to handle that. So why do siblings fight? First off, yeah, that's I like to put a plug in. That's my son. He looked very tired. And obviously, when siblings fight, we get a little exhausted too sometimes, and you might feel like you just want to curl up in a corner and go to sleep. But there's different reasons, and this isn't the add-all be-all list here. This is just a couple of them. But parental attention is always a big thing, and you can see this anywhere. Mom's paying more attention to you, so I'm going to start acting out to get their attention. Or I notice that when I do this more often, I'm going to get attention, and I really kind of want some attention right now, so I'm going to do that. So that's always a big thing. Personality conflicts. You might have one kid who's completely laid back, doesn't really mind when things happen, really easygoing, and the other one is just hard-nosed, tense, intense, and everything, and they know they can push things around, and they're going to do it if they can do it. And also differences, ages, genders, things that they prefer, the different needs that they have. Obviously, if you have an older sibling to a younger sibling, they're going to have conflicts over different things than kids who are the same age. So, and then the last one is desire for independence. Kids, although they like to hang out with each other, always also want to be independent, and they want to be their own person, and they're going to find ways to argue about that and then bring those conflicts up too. Other things, greed, again, attention. Also, their stuff, more stuff, friends' stuff, parents' stuff. There's always something in the house that's mine, 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 especially when you get into that 2-3-year-old age. That word mine likes to start coming out a little bit more, so that's always a big thing. And then also it's a learned behavior. Kids learn everything. Although we don't think about it, they really start to follow all the stuff we do. My son starts making this little face when there's a surprise, and I realize it's because I do it all the time, and I don't realize I do it. And now I'm kind of looking at a little mirror, and so they pick up things, and you don't realize they're doing it. So it's kind of important. So if we're having conflicts at home, or if you're talking to the TV, if you're watching Nebraska not do very good at basketball, and you yell at it, they might learn that behavior from you. So it's kind of important. And other things is the media, having TV on the news, cartoons, even other things. You're going to see conflicts and all that stuff, and they're going to absorb all that stuff that's on there, and that's one of their ways that they learn. What is life like? How does life work? This is what I'm seeing around me, and I guess that's how I'm supposed to act. So then the big question is how do we handle it? What do we do with it? Big thing is there's ways to prevent the arguments. If you're going to prevent them, let me make sure, you need to set some ground rules for the house. They need to be clear. So depending on the age, it's going to be different. There's going to be different ways you're going to communicate this to your kids. Obviously, a 3-year-old is not going to have the same critical thinking skills as, say, your 13-year-old, although sometimes it seems like the 13-year-old might regress at times. Other times is to communicate them often. Every time there's something going on, or even if not, and it seems like something's going to, they say, remember, these are the rules. These are the rules that we're going to do. If you're going to have these arguments, this is how we're going to handle these kind of situations. When you have rules, they need to be ironclad. You got to stick with them no matter what all the time. And sometimes it's easy to give in with rules, and I'm sure we've all done it. I've done it myself with my son. You know, we say no, 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 and after the 12th time they've argued about it, finally you're like, okay, fine. They really got to be ironclad, because once they learn that they can kind of bend the things a little bit, kids find ways to do it pretty well. So, and the last one is spell out the consequences. Make sure they know if this happens, these are going to be the consequences. Again, this goes with the ironclad part of things. If you say these are going to be the consequences and they do the wrong thing, they do what they're not supposed to do, you got to follow up on those consequences, because they have to learn that there is a cause and effect with these kind of things. So. And the last thing on that part is picking a couple areas to work on. You know, in any kind of thing in life, any kind of life-changing things, I always like to refer to dieting, because I'm terrible when it comes to eating a lot of the times. You're never going to change everything at once. You only want to make 1 or 2 changes at a time. So if you have kids that are arguing and you're trying to make changes to make that improved and better kind of in terms of that conflict resolution stuff, only change 1 or 2 things at a time, because you want to really focus on that one thing, have them work on that. Once they get that down, okay, move on to the next thing and do that. If you try to throw a whole bunch of things, you got to change this, 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 and this, it's not going to happen. It's a lot harder to do it that way. Other things, spending quality time with each kid. If you notice that some of their behaviors might be more attention, and even if it's not, make sure you're spending time with each kid. It doesn't have to be right at the same time with each other. Pick special times to say, okay, this is special time with this one, this is special time with this one, and let them know how important they are, that they're special, and try not to show specific preferential for one or the other, because that can always cause more conflict if you're doing that, so you kind of want to make sure you're being equal with that. Other thing is alone time. Some kids just need to be alone. They need to be on their own, play with their toys, kind of hang out. I'm not talking about timeouts. I'm just saying, hey, hang out over here. Your brother's going to go over here. Why don't you go over here and do this? And it's a good way to unwind, to kind of focus on themselves, and to kind of learn to be more of an individual person. And then the last thing is kind of the opposite of that, family time. Everybody gets involved. Everybody gets to do something together, something we like to do, playing games, doing different things, you know, eating. Obviously, meals always should be, I think, a family time type of thing. I think you guys should be able to sit down to a meal together and enjoy that with each other. But pick an activity that everybody can enjoy, and everybody gets involved when it has equal kind of sharing with that. Other things, don't fuel the fire. So if your kids are arguing and being like that, do not try to get in there and compare the children. Well, he's being worse than you are. You got to stop that. Your brother's not acting like that. You do. If a lot of times, if you throw those words around too much, that's where you start to get more into that preferential treatment and things like that, and looking for parents' attention. And that's something that you have to worry about. Pointing out individual strengths, again, can be helpful as long as we're being kind of not per se equal all the time, but making sure that they know that you're really good at doing this and you're really good at doing this when you guys are having these kind of conflicts. And kind of, you want to point out the positives and not the negatives. That's always a big thing with kids. They've done a lot of research, and whenever you look at any kind of conflict resolution, consequences, things like that, positive reinforcements is always going to be better than negative reinforcement. And then, again, minimizing competition. Don't compare. Don't try to put them against each other. Try to bring them together is always a big thing. And encouraging teamwork. And when we talk about encouraging teamwork, the big thing with that is try to get them to work together on how to resolve this conflict. Okay, you think this way, you think this way. How do you think we can balance this out? How do you think we can come to a conclusion where you're both happy? Because, again, that's a good learning skill for them. How do you balance things out? How do you come to a compromise? And obviously in life, we're always compromising with people on things. And that's an important life skill for them to learn. When the fighting starts, don't feel like you have to get involved right away. Don't feel like you have to jump in and be like, no, 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 and separate them. You can let them kind of start and see how they interact with each other. See how the argument goes. Now, sometimes you're going to get the same exact argument over and over and over, get the same exact thing. But it's a good way to kind of see if they're learning how to kind of behave and how to resolve these conflicts. Help with negotiation. You don't need to be the main negotiator and go in and be like, this is how it's going to be and that's it. But help them. Be like, what do you think your idea is? Okay, what's your idea? Oh, that's a good idea. This is a good idea. And try to help them with that. Sometimes, though, when we're arguing, we get a little heated and you need that cool down time. So sometimes it's like, you know what? How about we figure out how we're going to do this? Why don't you sit here for a couple minutes? You sit here for a couple minutes, come up with some ideas, and then let's talk about it. And sometimes that's all that's needed. Being impartial, again, is important. Don't identify a victim. Be like, well, you're really picking on your brother. You always pick on your brother. That's going to completely cause more conflict. So again, not picking sides and things like that. And then again, consequences. If you're going to have them, if you lay down ground rules, you got to have them and you got to stick with them. If you say this is going to be the consequence and they do the wrong thing, you got to stick with that consequence, or else they're going to learn that they can kind of push boundaries. Again, common triggers. Who is better? The whole "I want, that's mine" type of thing. TV programs sometimes. Kids fight over the TV. My resolution is just don't have TV with it, but that's sometimes not always the easiest thing. But they want to watch different programs, and of course, as they get older, some like one program versus another program, and that can cause issues. And again, chores too. Some kids might have different chores at different times. One might have a more messy room than the other, and they feel like they're having to spend more time on their chores versus their sibling. And so it's finding kind of ways to. They're going to find things to argue about, and you got to find ways to kind of handle that. And again, the big question always comes into fairness. What is fair? But that's not fair. Why are you acting like that with them? You don't do that for me, so why is this fair? And again, equal is not fair. Not always the same thing. So you can't always say that things always have to be 100% equal, because in those cases, that's always not going to be the fair thing. So the big thing here is, what is the need here? What's not the complaint? So you're complaining about this, but what do you really need? And that's a good thing for kids to try to start learning early on too. What do you need? Do you really need to have that, or is that just something you want? Is that just something you're complaining about? Again, enlisting the children to help determine what's fair. This goes back to them kind of building those conflict resolutions. I know you want this, but what do you think seems fair? Is what you're saying seem fair? Kind of try to see it from your brother or your sister's point of view. Try to see it from someone else's point of view. Does that seem like a fair compromise? And then also give them permission to disagree. We don't always agree with each other. My wife and I do not always agree on things. And we just say, you know what, we agree to disagree, and that's how it is. We say, this is how you think, and that's totally fine, because you're an individual, and that's your thoughts on this. And I'm an individual, that's my thoughts on that. And you got to make sure kids understand that you can have that permission to disagree. You don't have to agree on everything in life. And then again, don't dismiss negative feelings either. So if there's these negative feelings, don't just totally blow them off and things like that. You got to make sure that we're kind of covering how kids are feeling and everything, and you don't want to just be like, oh, okay, I'm sorry you feel that way, but too bad for you, kind of thing. You want to really make sure that everybody at the end of the conflict is feeling better. Again, there's other special circumstances. Sometimes we have a special needs kid in the house. They obviously get more attention than the siblings. And sometimes when that happens, you can start to see other siblings act out a little bit more because they're looking for a little bit more attention. So that can sometimes cause that. Blended families, and a lot of times when we talk about blended families, that's you have kids from one marriage coming from another marriage, and then they come together and they're not used to each other. And when you blend in that way or blend in other ways, you can come into different conflicts, some of those being routines. I'm used to this routine at my other family's house, and I'm used to a routine at my other mom's house, but when we come to this house, the routine's different. And I'm not used to that, so that's going to create some conflict. And again, we need to learn to respect those differences, respect that this is different that you're used to, and I'm used to this, and we're individuals, and that's going to be a different thing. And again, a new baby, that's always a big change in a household, and that's always a big thing, and that can cause some conflicts in kids. The biggest thing is always preparing the older sibling. And then this is going to depend on how old that kid is. It's going to depend on what their age is and how prepared they're going to be. Again, when they're about 2-3 years old, they get into that really big mind state. So a lot of times what I recommend, I know a lot of other people recommend, is once we know either if we're finding out what the sex is of the baby or even not, you can always refer, when you're talking about the baby, your brother, your sister, your baby. If you give that kid that sense of possession, when the baby's born, they feel they have that better connection with that child than when it's just, oh, little Susie's coming, little Susie's coming. And if you're just talking about the baby but not referring to it and involving that child, they're going to feel a little bit more resentment that way. So we always kind of say, give that kid a little bit more kind of control and ownership of that sibling that's coming. And like we said at the beginning, fighting is not a bad thing, and arguing is not a bad thing. You learn from them. You grow from them. I'm sure we can all think back in our lives and difficult times we had that we learned from, and that's always what happens with these situations. You learn how to handle these kind of situations better. You learn better negotiation skills, and again, this is how do I compromise with this person? How do I communicate better with other people? Self-restraint. Well, I used to get really angry about these things, but you know what? I understand that this person thinks this way now. I'm not going to get angry about it. I can kind of hold my feelings back. That's a good thing to have. It's good to have some self-restraint. And then seeing another's perspective, that's always important, especially in conflict resolution, relationships later in life, jobs we work at, having families of our own. It's good to be able to see from another perspective, and to learn how to do that at an early age is a really beneficial thing. And when all else fails, catch them off guard. If we're just trying and things aren't working, totally do something different. Change the subject, come up with something totally different, change the scenario. If you got two kids just yelling and you're trying all these different things and things aren't working, just totally come up with something absurd to say. Just anything. Just talk about the weather, the cat, the dog, anything, just different, totally out there that they're not expecting. And sometimes just that kind of break in the argument can just stop stuff and kind of cool things down a little bit. And the other thing is sometimes too, just laugh about it. If they got into some silly argument about it, once everybody's cooled down, you can kind of laugh about it, have a little joke about it, be like, it's not a big deal. Don't worry about it. It's fine. And you as the parent, if they kind of argued and things kind of got a little bit heated, but they're fine now, you know what? Just regroup. Tomorrow's another day, and we can kind of work on things and build on things after that. There are situations, of course, when you need to get some extra help if you can't handle it at home. Physical harm is always an important thing. Physical harm to each other, siblings, toward the parents, that's always important. And that's always you want to let somebody know. If you have a pediatrician or a physician that you see, you can refer to them. There's other help out there for it too. And so you always, if that's coming to where things are going, we always want to find some extra help for that. Other things are psychological harm. Some kids can have some psychological harm from specific conflicts, depending on the type of conflicts. And you might not see it, but there's a lot of new research out there now about something called toxic stress. And toxic stress is this idea that kids, we're supposed to be in stressful situations. It's how our body learns. And when we get put into stressful situations, there's certain chemicals and hormones that get released from our body. And as long as we get a little bit of that stress hormones and then we learn how to control our stress and it goes away, our body learns how to handle stressful situations. But what toxic stress is either you get put into very serious toxic kind of situations where really bad conflicts, or you get little conflicts that keep building up, but you never get a chance to drop back down to your baseline. Your body starts adapting, and it adapts in a bad way, and you lose that ability to have conflict resolution. You lose that ability to learn what's right and wrong. You lose that ability to be able to handle stressful situations. And this starts at a very early age, and I'm talking kids that are infants. If they are in stressful situations, and even one of the many common things that they talk about when you look at the papers is getting vaccines as a kid. We're all really scared about getting vaccines a lot of times. Oh, I don't want them to hurt, things like that. It's actually what they found in the papers, it's actually a good form of stress. It's a positive stress, because what happens is they get the shot, it hurts, they cry, but then the parent comforts them. And when the parent comforts them, it learns, oh, it's okay, and that stress level comes back down. And they've looked at kind of levels and stuff and shown that actually is actually a positive stressful situation in kids' lives when you look at those. So really these toxic stress things start at a really early age, and that's what we talk about, these conflict resolutions and things like that. It's really important to start as early as possible to help them kind of learn how to deal with these things. The last thing, of course, too, is marital problems. Sometimes it's super hard to be in a family where everybody's yelling at each other, and it puts stress on mom, stress on dad. Kids like to pit mom and dad against each other, and sometimes it creates a rift between each other. And if that's the case, that's definitely, and you see that's happening, we got to find some extra help with it. Obviously, we're trying our best at home, and it's just not getting the results we want. We got to find some extra help. We need someone to help us out with this, a counselor, a physician, a friend, another family member. We just need to get some extra help on this. So these are some other resources like I talked about, obviously. Children's does have a family support center, and that's their phone number on there. Again, having a pediatrician, if you have a pediatrician, that's going to be one of your best resources for your kids, because we have a lot of the resources. We know a lot of resources that we have. The nice thing with a lot of our offices, at least with children's, we do have child psychologists in a lot of our offices too, and that's a nice benefit because we can kind of work together on those types of things. And also, the website, it's not always a bad place going on the internet. There's some sites that are a little bit better than others, but healthychildren.org actually is a good one. It's ran by the American Academy of Pediatric Parent website. I go a lot of times too just to look at things and be like, I hope I'm not going crazy, because my 14-month-old still just does not want to eat dinner or lunch or breakfast, and he just loves his milk, and I'm like, please just help me find something to get him to eat. And it works sometimes, but it's just, he's a 14-month-old, so that's what they do. Like I said, he really likes his milk. So anyways, if there's any questions or comments about any of that, I can go back and talk. I know sometimes as I start kind of talking fast. So if I glanced over something that you guys saw that was interesting you wanted to talk about, I can definitely go back and look at it.
Can you talk some more about toxic stress?
Yeah. So toxic stress. So what they've done, and when they look at it, is like I said, there's three types of stress they talk about. They talk about the positive stress. So these are stressful situations that are, like I talked about, some type of minor kind of stress. So you fall down and hurt yourself. Talking about vaccines in littler kids. You get into a small argument, but it doesn't go very far. Bad grades at school, getting disciplined at school, just getting trouble at home. It's one of those things where you get stressed out about something, breaking a toy, things like that. You get stressed out about it, the kid gets stressed out about it, their body releases these stress hormones and there's these chemical changes, but then at those points, you have that parental figure or that guardian that helps them learn how to calm back down and how to drop that stress back down, and that's a really important thing. The next level before you get to the toxic stress is kind of like an intermediate stress where you can have these higher stress levels, and that can be like a death in the family, a pet dying, a really kind of bad social situation at home. Not abusive or anything like that, but maybe parents are getting divorced, things like that. But again, you still have that parental figure there to help them learn how to deal with that stress. Those are stress levels that you don't want to have to worry about having a whole lot of times, but you're going to have some of those in your life, and you got to learn how to handle them. So they're still considered an okay form of stress, but you don't want to have a whole lot of it at once because it can cause some issues. And then the third stage is that toxic stress. And what happens in toxic stress, and there's a lot of different studies out there now, and what they're actually looking at is certain areas of the brain that are involved with handling different aspects, our social aspects, learning what's right and wrong, where our fear center is in our brain, things like that. And what they found is people who go through these toxic stress levels, and toxic stress can be abusive families, physical abuse, sexual abuse, parents that do drugs, that are alcoholics, or having these smaller stresses, but not having that parent or guardian to help them learn how to calm down. Where the parent's just like, you'll be fine, see you later. And if you have those kind of neglectful situations, they never learn how to help handle that stress. And so when that happens, you get these changes in the body over time, and the brain actually gets to a point where it just doesn't know how to handle it anymore. And so, and it doesn't know how to have these conflict resolutions, and that's why you see some of these kids who grow up in these kind of situations and they don't learn how to handle it. They have hard situations later on because they never learned how to handle situations. So later on, they don't make good decisions. They don't have good relationships with people because their brain at that point, they have a hard time learning how to do it, and sometimes their brain just can't figure it out. So that's kind of where that research is. It's a little bit newer. It's been gone, I think. Trying to think, it's been about 5 years or so where they've been really focusing on it now, but it's a little bit kind of a newer phrase that they're using. So, yeah.
When you're trying to deal with the argument, but you see that one of the children is very, whether he's tired or is really, emotionally into it, and the physical part of it happens, where it just hits him, and from discipline before, they always say you just put him on timeout. But when that happens and they just get so volatile that he just gets out of hand so fast, how do, more than handling the child that is doing all the physical things, how do you handle the other one?
The other one.
So they feel like they still got the argument fixed, regardless of the show that the other one is doing.
Yeah, and I think, again, that's going to be trying to balance the time between the two at a time, and that's where you can probably use that cool down time. Be like, well, okay, hold on. And that's when you step in. When you see that physical thing happen, you say, okay, stop. And you separate them, and you say, all right, we're going to take a little time. How about you come over here, you over here. I'm going to talk to each of you and talk about what's going on and how you're feeling about this and why we're having an issue with this conflict and what's going on with it. And at that point, I think you can start addressing their specific needs, but in a separate kind of situation. And so in that case, you're saying, you know what, I'm going to spend equal time with each of you. I'm not going to show preferential treatment to you. And then try to address those specific things individually with each one is what I would probably recommend with that. Now, if we're still seeing that physical, seeing that physical, seeing that physical, seeing that physical, then the question comes out to, where are we learning this behavior from? Am I doing something that's doing that? And that's where that whole issue of spanking and things come in. And you see a lot of new research come out there. And I'm not going to lie, I was spanked a couple times as a kid. But a lot of the new research out there shows when you get spanked and you spank your child, you're pretty much showing them, when you do something bad, I'm going to hit you. When you do something bad, I'm going to hit you. And even it might not be a hard hit. You're not leaving a bruise or anything, but you're showing them you've done something bad, your consequence is hitting. Oh, when my brother did something bad to me, I'm going to hit them. My friend at school did something bad to me, I'm going to hit them. And that's that learned behavior. And so sometimes you have to step back and say, okay, where are we learning this? Is it something on TV that we're watching? Is it friends at school? Is it something I'm doing at home? That's always kind of that question of where that's coming from. And sometimes we can figure that at home on ourselves, and other times we get that extra help. And that's where something you can call your pediatrician and see, this is going on at home. We've tried this and this and this and still not helping. Where can we go with this? What else can we do about this? Who should we talk to? Should we come and see you? Should we go talk to a counselor? What's the answer here? So I think that would be kind of what I would say with that.
Is there any difference if it only happens at home?
If it only happens at home.
Magical child outside of your home that everybody says, "Oh, I love your kids," and you're like, "I'm glad you have them." But it's only, which is I think is a good thing that they understand that they can't behave like that outside of the home, but when they try to kill each other inside the home, it's like, what do you want to do?
And I think some of that has to do with they might have maybe learned that. At home, we can act a little bit more aggressive towards each other. And so we're at home, so we can do this and do that. And I think that's where that whole consequence thing comes into play, too. If you guys do this, this is the consequence. If you guys do this, this is the consequence. And you stick with that consequence, and you stick with that constantly. Because if they've learned that they can act a certain way at home and they don't get that consequence anymore, in terms of a timeout or whatever specific consequence you want to use, you're not going to get to play with this toy tonight or something like that. Then they've learned at home that that's a situation where compared to if they're at school or out somewhere else and they do that, there's usually a consequence from somebody else around them, especially when parents aren't around if they're at school or something like that. But at home, if they've kind of learned potentially to bend the rules a little bit, they're going to push things a little bit more at home because there's a little bit more of a comfort level at home and that they feel that they can kind of try to test the waters a little bit more. And again, I think that's where you set the ground rules. These are the rules. This is how we're going to handle these situations. If you break the rules, this is the consequence, and you stick with it. Does that answer it?
Yeah. It does.
Yeah.
I'll let you know tomorrow.
There you go. Yeah.
After bedtime.
Well, it might take a little bit longer than just tomorrow. Yeah.
I have a question from our Mamaha chat. This is from a dad who has 2 children. They're the tween age. Mm-hmm. He says they play pranks on each other constantly. One hates to be seen with the other at family outings. Is there a way to help them learn to get along, and when will they start getting along?
Oh, when will they start getting along? That's a good question. It's hard to say. I guess it depends on kind of what their age difference is, what their personalities are. There's not really a generic answer to say do this, and they're going to be happy and live together and love each other and everything. A lot of it's going to depend on what are their personalities. Do they have the same personalities and they're type A people and they're clashing? Is one really laid back and the other one's not? Is one more of a sports person, one more of a book person, and so they don't have the same interests, and so they have a hard time kind of relating to each other, and that's always going to be the hard thing. I think the big thing is really going to be that family time with things, and that, we're going to go out and do this, or we're going to do this together, and finding common ground, finding common interests, and doing that. Again, the teenage years are a little bit more tough in terms of our personalities. We're learning how to be individuals and who we are and how we're going to react. And I'm not going to be like my sibling anymore. Whenever we used to be together when we were younger, they always said, oh, there's the, whatever names you want to put together for kids. My sister and I, my twin sister, we used to argue all the time. And we would go stand at the bus at elementary school, and we were known as the temper toffles because we argued all the time. And so we were just called the temper toffles. And that's what people referred to us as. And then we learned how to have conflicts with each other, and we developed and eventually grew out of that. By teen years, I promise we got to liking each other again. But it's a little bit different situation. So I think you have to try to find common ground with the two and find a family activity then that you can do that with them together. And so that they interact with each other a little bit more, they have a little bit more fun with each other. And it's just going to be kind of that repetitive thing. There's not ever going to be a quick fix when it comes to these things. It's got to be continuous. And I'm not saying spend time all the time together. Again, they need to learn how to be individuals. They need to learn how to have their own separate time. But you kind of have to kind of work on how are we going to relate to each other? Where can we find a common ground, a common interest, and start to really relate a little bit better? Because once you find that common interest, you'll notice they'll start to talk a little bit more with each other about it, maybe interact a little bit more about it. And so that would be, I guess, my best answer. So, yeah.
We have a strip of 6 kids.
Okay.
5 girls, 1 boy.
Oh, poor guy.
From 17 to 2 8-year-olds. A boy and a girl set of twins. We have an 11-year-old that just does not get along with any of them.
Okay.
The other night she spit in her sister's hair. We went, oh my gosh. Just, I spend time with that child. We sit on the couch for They start going to bed at 7:38, 8:39, 9:30, and between 8 and 8:30, it's her and my time. But it's just not getting any better. And this has been, what, 4 or 5 months we've been doing that?
So what do we do? And I think that's sometimes the harder situations too. When you have the larger number, when you have more kids at home, it's trying to figure out how to spend that time to each one. And that might be, again, one of those situations. I don't know kind of what you guys do family-wise in terms of together, if there's specific family games you guys like to have at nights in terms of, I know there's probably a different conflict of personalities, especially with ages and things like that. But it's sometimes fun to try to find specific games that you guys can play together, like silly card games, like apples to apples or something like that, where I think that can go across any kind of age. That game, I like that game. I don't know. But I think it's trying to find ways to have them bond with each other and find common interests again, I think in that situation, it is tough to be able to say, I'm going to get equal time with each one of you, and then not have it be tomorrow by the time I get to the sixth one. It's exactly, yeah.
This night, soccer that night, this that night.
Yeah.
And there's just not.
It's hard to get
We sat down
them.
for dinner Thursday night, and one of them commented, God, it's been forever since we all sat down for dinner.
Yeah.
And that's something that I stress on, is sitting all down to get to dinner.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's one of those things is when you know you're going to get that time for everybody to be together, try to get it so everybody's together. Try to get it, all right, you're not off doing this sport, you're not off doing this thing, this club thing, you're not off going to your friend's house today. You know what, let's try to do something family-oriented. Or let's try to set up on, like, let's look at the calendar and say, you know what, this day every 2 weeks is going to be family time. And we're going to try to do this stuff together. We're going to try to do this together. And I think with that, when you have that large number, it is really hard to do individual attention to every single one of them equally. And so if you can try to get them all together and get kind of that common ground, and again, they're not going to all of a sudden be like each other. We're not going to be the Brady Bunch, but trying to get that common ground and get that experience to being comfortable with each other. Hopefully you'll get that. Now again, like I said, you're not going to get rid of all conflict. There's going to still be conflict, and that's a good thing. It's okay to have conflict, but it's as long as it's not getting to that really aggressive stages, and it's learning how to compromise and how to kind of deal with our outbursts, to deal with our differences, and to learn that we're all different and that we have different perspectives on life and things like that, and that it's okay to be that way, and it's okay to be different, and it's okay to disagree on this and that and everything. So,
telling each one of them they need to stay in their own little box. It doesn't pertain to Maddie. You don't need to tell me about it.
Mm-hmm.
But Grandma, you don't stay in your box. I says, I got all of you guys and everybody else in my box. Oh, okay. So got the twins doing it.
yeah.
They stay in their box. It's the other ones that don't.
And it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough to keep them like that, to where, and I'll say, it's good for them to be able to say, you know what, if this doesn't have anything to do with you, you don't have to worry about it. But again, I would say it's one of those situations too where if the conflict's starting, you don't have to jump in right away though either. Let them see if they can kind of work something out on their own, because if they can learn how to do it on their own, then that's going to be less conflict you have to worry about later down the road. And so I would say you don't want to completely isolate them in every single little situation and jump in with every little disagreement here and there. Try to let them work it out, but you can still kind of be a look, kind of watching, seeing how things are working, seeing how things are going. Again, not picking sides or anything like that. If they need a little help kind of compromising, give some ideas, but try to let them work it out, because if they can learn those skills, they should be able to deal with the situations a lot easier down the road. And again, it's going to be one of those learned things. If we've learned to act a certain way in the past and now we're trying to fix it, is it going to take just as long, if not maybe a little longer, to break it and to fix it a different way? So, and it's just kind of how our brains work.
I was gonna say, I have 4 kids, and I know that when they tattletale, I just ask him about it, like, well, what do you think he did wrong, or why did he? And those questions, they're like, oh, now I get to analyze the thing. Well, that's boring. So then they won't tattletale as much because they know they're gonna get a little.
And I think that's good, and that's that self-restraint idea. Not even self-restraint about ways you're gonna act out on something, but I think this person did something wrong. Well, why is that wrong? And I think that's a good way for them to kind of learn how to do it. So I think that's a good thing too. Yeah.
As a teacher, I used to, when the kids would come up and start to tattle, I would say, before you can tell me what the other person did, you have to tell me what your part was in the situation. Mm-hmm. And it was so hard for them to say, I did whatever, but I always said, you have to start it with I and then finish it. And it usually that really got them thinking about the situation, what was going on.
Never mind, Mom.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I have two daughters that are pretty close in age, they're like a year apart. And my oldest daughter is very strong-willed, and my younger daughter is very laid back. And so my question, I guess, is how do I prevent my older daughter from constantly like running over and like just being overbearing to my younger daughter, who most of the time is very docile and will go along with whatever the older one wants to do. And if they're playing house, then my younger one's always the dad, and most of the time she's fine with that. But sometimes she wants to be the mom too, or and then that causes just a big temper tantrum and fallout from the older one. So,
and I think with that too, again, it's not something where we're going to be able to completely change her personality. But if it's certain ways they like to play, like playing house or whatever it is, each day it's the other one's turn on getting to choose how it's going to go. Who's going to choose the roles? So today you get to choose. Okay, today's your turn to choose. What do you want to do? You get to make the choice, and then the other one goes along with it. And that's kind of, getting to deal with other people's decisions and things like that. I think that's one way you can do that. Again, it's going to be part for the more docile one to kind of to learn to step out of her shell a little bit and to kind of stand up for herself. And that does take some time. It takes a bit more time than for somebody who's more of an aggressive personality to learn to back off a little bit sometimes. And so I think that's an important thing. It's going to be an important life skill for her to learn how to, she doesn't have to become all of a sudden aggressive and this is mine, this is mine, this is how it's going to be. But she's got to learn to stand up for herself at some point. And I think starting it that way, saying, what do you want to do? What is your thought on this? And today is your day to get to choose what we're going to do. And everybody has to do it. Even if older sister says, I don't like doing that game, or I don't want to do that. Sorry, it's her day. Today's her day. Tomorrow we'll do your game. And if we can make sure that she makes the decision, and everybody does it, that's going to reinforce that, okay, I made a decision and people were okay with it. And so now I can kind of voice my opinion a little bit more because it seems like people seem okay with what I'm saying.